I'd been driving 18-wheelers for over 20 years when the voice came through the CB. My own voice, whispering from a dead channel that hadn't worked in months. Same tone, same words I'd spoken to a dying man back in Wyoming. Only problem was, that man wasn't supposed to be talking anymore. The night was flat and endless, rain hammering the hood, my headlights slicing through the dark like knives through wet paper. I swear to you, something was riding with me in that cab. Something that knew too much about what happened on that road 15 years ago. What if the highway remembers every lie you tell on it? What if tonight it decides to talk back? Don't touch that dial. Hit the like button, subscribe, and stay with me till the end. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't a story. It's a confession that started with one whisper and ended with blood on the dash. Dawn didn't break so much as seep in, a pale peach light leaking over the flats east of Amarillo, laying itself across the asphalt like a thin blanket you could see through. Jack Mercer kept the old Peterbilt steady, the way 2 decades on the road teach you to be steady, throttle feathered, engine rumble held at the familiar range where you can feel the power more than hear it. In the cab, it smelled like diesel and sun-cooked vinyl and the faint bite of peppermint, cheap gum to keep the throat from drying out. The CB muttered with that polite, sleepy static you get before sunrise when the long haulers talk low and the day drivers haven't yet spilled their coffee. Jack didn't listen with his ears. He listened with his skin. If the radio was talking, the world was still stitched together. Interstate lines unspooling clean, exits arriving when the map said they would. Amarillo fell behind with its neon steakhouse signs and windmills craning like patient birds. Ahead, the land leveled toward the Oklahoma line. No drama, just space, and the long, straight thinking that comes with it. He liked leaving before the sun got sure of itself. The ritual mattered. Check the oil not by the quart, but by the feel of it between finger and thumb. Tap each tire with a thud of the iron like a doctor listens to a chest. Walk the perimeter. Palm the metal he knew down to the last dent and patched fender. The truck wasn't factory anymore. It was a ship rebuilt at sea. Part after part harvested, traded, borrowed, learned. He'd pulled a new starter in a motel lot in Tucumcari, welded a bracket behind a Love's outside gallop, rewired a temperamental taillight with a hotel lamp cord in Chakotah. The rig answered with loyalty, sometimes at the first breath of the key, sometimes at the third, but always with a purr like a big dog pleased to be taken along. "Hold together, Rosie," he said. Rosie being the name that had stuck to the Peterbilt without anybody deciding it. His voice sounded thick in the early hour. "Long pull today, but we've eaten longer." His face, reflected faint in the passenger window, looked like the honest truth of the highway. Wide shoulders, ropey forearms, a brow crossed by creases the Texas sun carved. The gray at his temples wasn't surrender so much as mileage logged. The eyes were steady. That steadiness had gotten him through ice in Wyoming, dust in New Mexico, and the kind of grief you can't chain down to a trailer. Fields flanked the interstate like a quilt of dry greens and browns, stitched by barbed wire and the occasional line of cottonwoods that didn't mind wind. A roadside cross flashed by, white wood, plastic flowers paled by the sun, and left a hitch in his breath that he let pass. Jack wasn't superstitious exactly. He just knew the road remembered everything. By the time the light firmed up, the day had that taste it gets on the plains, like the air's been baked and cooled and put back in the oven again. He unscrewed the thermos and drank, letting the heat go down slow. A harvest of bugs peppered the windshield, a constellation that would be different by noon. The clock on the dash said nothing. Its red numbers had given up one winter outside Flagstaff. But his body told him it was a little after first light, which, to Jack, translated to early enough that trouble is still thinking it over. The pavement ran ruler straight. Grain silos stood on the horizon like chess pieces set for a game no one had time to play. Now and then, a westbound rig nodded in that quiet fraternity that doesn't require words. Jack nodded back. A mile is lighter when somebody else is shouldering one across from you. He had been thinking less these days, on purpose. Let the mind free, and it runs to the wrong places. Still, thoughts puddled up on their own. The house outside of Canyon, now just shelves of books he never opened, a refrigerator that hummed for nobody, a collar on a hook with a dog's name that didn't bark anymore. The recordings on his phone, messages he could play if he wanted to hear a voice the world had taken back. He kept his lane. He kept his speed. He kept the past in the side mirrors, where the angle made it easy to pretend it was just another driver in no particular hurry. Sometime after the sun got over its shyness, the rig's hum shifted a hair. Jack felt it before he heard it, a tremor through the column like a guitar string plucked wrong. He turned the radio lower with a thumb's touch and let the cabin fill with the honest language of machinery. The tone was off by a notch you wouldn't notice unless you'd carried the sound in your bones for years. "Easy," he said, gentle as to a spooked horse. "We'll find a turnout. You can tell me your secrets." The next rest area sign promised one in a handful of miles. Out here, a handful of miles is the same as a promise if the weather stays polite. The gauge needles were where they ought to be. The light kept pouring in. If he nursed Rosie just so, they'd slide into a wide square of asphalt bordered by a picnic table, and a map of Texas faded to the color of an old denim jacket. The hum steadied, coy. He let out a breath that he hadn't meant to be holding. The interstate unrolled its gray tongue mile after mile, and he set the Peterbilt in the right lane like a big animal trained to heel. At the rest area, he parked long and straight, killed the engine, and waited. Silence came down like a heavy blanket. The world outside took its volume back, cicadas sawing at the heat, a little wind gnawing the edge of a flag, a faraway train laying down its iron music. Jack stayed a beat in his seat. With some machines, the first step is a minute of listening. People are the same, only worse at it. He climbed out, the door giving a familiar creak, and the day slapped him full in the face. Heat worked the metal until it popped and sighed. He lifted the hood, the hinges protesting before the weight settled into place, and leaned over the beating heart he knew by rib and hose and bolt. He didn't just look. He took in the shape of it with his whole body. The radiator's breath. The faint sweat of oil where it had always been a little loose and never more than that. The way the belts kept their line. Then, clear as a radio station you don't quite pick up until you pass a certain low spot in the land. Something spoke. Not a voice like a person's. Not an echo in his head. Something between the two. A thread of sound woven into the engine's afterheat. A whisper from the block as it settled, from the turbo cooling down, from the bones of the truck. It said his name, or the shape of it. It said, "Don't lie." He went still, oil rag in hand, eyes on nothing. The cicadas kicked the volume up. Wind jittered a handful of cottonwood leaves, and the afterticks inside the engine chased one another down like cooling rain. Jack waited for the foolishness to pass. It didn't. The whisper didn't come again, but the memory of it nested behind his breastbone like a bird deciding whether to stay. Heat, he told himself. Metal talks when it's hot, that's all. He checked the housing on the fuel filter, pulled the cap, squinted at the color. Clean enough, hoses tight. The wire to the lift pump wore a bit of tape from an old desert fix. He slid it between thumb and forefinger, felt the scar of it, and put it back how it had sat for months that turned into years. He'd once heard an old hand say never pull a bandage off a running thing. From the picnic area came the scrape of a cooler lid and a small chorus of kids who decided a lizard was the most interesting thing in Texas. Jack put the hood down easy, not wanting to jar whatever balance he'd just confirmed or imagined. He wiped his hands on a rag that smelled like every county between here and the Pacific and climbed back into the cab. When he turned the key, the Peterbilt caught immediately, that happy dog purr. Jack told himself the rest area's plains flat quiet had loaned him a trick of the ear. He put Rosie in gear, eased back onto the interstate, and let the day swallow him again. The line to the state border is a joke only people who live near it tell. Paint on a map, a sign on a pole, a switch in the speed limit that makes you check your foot. The land didn't care. Neither did the wind. He passed a billboard for a fireworks warehouse and another for a steak as big as your hat. The sky had been clear earlier, but now no one's business and everyone's problem. A bank of cloud was dragging itself up from the panhandle like a tired animal heading home. The air carried the smell you can't lie about, rain thinking it might make a point. The hum returned, that wrong note. Not louder exactly, truer, like it had gotten his attention once and didn't intend to ask twice. He turned the radio down again until it was a breath and listened. The shape of the sound said fuel, not spark. The pulse under the throttle said it wasn't starving yet, just reconsidering dinner. Don't start, he warned. And the way the word came out made him think of other warnings he'd spoken too late. On the flat ahead, a green sign promised a service exit with a truck stop in less than a dozen miles. He numbered them off, not with digits, but with landmarks. Stand of scrub, culvert, a lone windmill whose head never did agree with the rest of the state. He thought of coffee burnt in a good way, a shower whose hot water ran a little too hard, and a man behind a counter who would call him boss and mean no offense. He thought of calling a number he had not called in too long and letting it ring once more than he should. The engine stumbled. It came back. Stumbled again, longer. He eased out of the throttle. When he lifted, the stumble smoothed. When he breathed on the pedal again, the hiccup returned. The Peterbilt coughed once, as if embarrassed to be heard. "All right," he said, not angry, not yet. "We'll dance." A pull-off appeared, more shoulder than mercy, but better than the live lane when weather might turn. He signaled by courtesy and habit, even with no one behind him, and eased onto the grit. The big tires crushed shale with that soft grind that says you are not in a place meant for stopping, and yet here you are. He killed the engine. The sudden quiet felt like a church when the last hymn ends and everybody stands because they forgot it's over. He opened the door and the wind shouldered in, carrying a weight it hadn't had an hour ago. When he lifted the hood this time, he heard it again. Jack. A whisper from the metal. A syllable drawn not with breath, but with heat and stress and familiarity. It ran down his spine like cold water. He could have laughed at himself, or prayed, or done both. But he did neither. He braced an elbow on the radiator support, leaned down where the lift pump lived, and touched the electrical tape he himself had wrapped a couple of winters back in a motel parking lot where the ice made a liar out of everything. The tape had softened in summers and stiffened in winters and looked about ready to become a story you tell younger drivers so they'll bring proper connectors. Beneath the tape, the wire flexed wrong. He didn't need to see it to know, a split where cotton, copper, and good luck meet. "Thought so," he said. And the wind took the words and hid them in the wheat. He peeled the tape. The wires showed its wound, not bigger than a freckle. But a wound is a wound. He cleaned it with a rag and a bit of spit, then stripped a finger's worth of insulation with the pocket knife he'd carried since a summer of fence mending back when you could still hear your young bones sing if you listened. He twisted the copper tight and snugged it back under the connector, then wrapped it again with care. The fix wasn't pretty. It wasn't permanent. But the road respected a man who could talk a mile out of bad luck with what he had on him. The first raindrops hit the hood like quarters tossed onto a bar. Big, deliberate. He named them out of habit. Here we go. Here it comes. Here's your second chance. He closed the hood, climbed into the cab before the sky changed its mind and unloaded, and sat a second with his hands on the wheel. "Talk to me straight," he said, not sure whether he meant the truck or himself. He turned the key. The Peterbilt barked, cleared its throat, and settled into a sound that set his shoulders down an inch. The stumble did not immediately return. He let the idle sit, counted to a slow 20. It held. The first roll of thunder came from a long way off, so slow you could believe it was the earth shifting. Out on the shoulder, the wind picked up the taste of dirt and metal and the old creek beds that wake when it rains. Jack looked into the mirror at the empty lanes. One more test, then the truck stop. That was the plan. Check in with a mechanic he trusted enough to argue with. Get a hot meal that didn't come out of cellophane. Let the storm wash the land into something that made a sound like forgiveness. He eased her into gear and brought her back onto the road. The sky to the north bruised. The space ahead narrowed, the way space does when a storm lays its hand on it. The Peterbilt rolled smooth for a half mile, then a mile, then 2. Jack didn't think about grace or luck. He thought about what was next. Exit ramp, right turn, the smell of fryer oil, a man at a parts counter with hands as black as his. Then the whisper came, unmistakable, stronger than before. It wasn't in his head. It wasn't in the engine. It was in the cabin, in the steel and glass and air. Don't lie. The throttle trembled under his foot. The engine stumbled, caught, then stumbled again, longer, as if considering whether to keep its promise to be alive. Ahead, through the first hard sheets of rain, the blue and yellow sign for a truck stop wavered like a coin at the bottom of a shallow river. Jack set his jaw, felt the wheel hum back through his palms, and said, "One more mile, Rosie, just one." The rain came on like a decision finally made. It started as a scatter, coins on a countertop, then turned to a steady drumming that made the road look like a tape of gray glass unspooling under the Peterbilt's nose. Wipers thumped their metronome, left, right, and the blue and yellow truck stop sign flickered in the distance like a lighthouse that had learned neon. Jack kept his hands light on the wheel. Old habit. If you clamped down, the truck would answer in kind, muscle for muscle. And the skid gods liked to fight. The engine still had that wobble in it, not a limp so much as a reminder that no machine ever forgets what you've asked it to do. He kept whispering to Rosie without noticing he was doing it, just the small, steady syllables a man offers a dog before a thunderclap or a child before a shot. "One more mile, sweetheart. Just breathe." He took the exit slow, tires hiss-singing on the wet curve, then eased into the lot where the water pooled in the ancient potholes like old regrets. The truck stop wanted to be anywhere, but it belonged to this patch of Oklahoma panhandle. Low brick, big glass, a dozen flags fading in the wind. The smell of fryer oil and coffee and diesel and the bindery glue that holds convenience store pastries together. A tanker idled in the far corner, chrome dull in the rain. while a couple of reefers slept side by side under the wide sodium lamps that turned everything the color of a bruise. Jack slid Rosie into a long bay. When he killed the engine this time, the silence didn't drop so much as step down slow, as if sound itself needed to catch its breath. For a second he waited, listening for the voice again, that thread of steel speech that had told him not to lie. The cabin clicked and ticked as hot met cold. The storm shoved a fistful of wind across the lot. No whisper followed. He let out air he didn't know he'd hoarded. Inside, the place was bright in that tired way that never shuts off. A bell above the door didn't ring. It thunked like it had learned better than to celebrate. The counter had a glass case of pie whose meringue peaks looked like sculpted weather. Off to the right, the showers were down a hall with a floor that had seen everything a road person can carry in. Off to the left, a small parts desk glowed with the promise of O-rings, hoses, light bulbs, hope. The kind of place where a man in a burgundy polo calls you boss and means, I can't solve your life, but I can hand you the exact gasket you need. The waitress had a pencil in her hair and the kind of eyes that had learned to read a person before they sat down. Her name tag said Maya in block letters that looked carved by a kitchen knife, and the way she moved made Jack think of people who grew up near trains, always aware of the big, heavy thing moving nearby, but never letting it run their day. Coffee? She asked, not so much offering as promising. Please, and yes, Jack said, sliding into a booth with a view of the lot where Rosie hunched like a wet animal. And whatever passes for breakfast when you don't look too closely. Hash, eggs, toast, Maya said. You can look close, it's food. Then hash, eggs, toast, he said. And thanks. Her smile touched one corner of her mouth and then hid. She poured coffee from a pot that had been scrubbed and loved despite a chip near the spout. The smell came up like a memory you're glad to have. Jack wrapped both hands around the mug and let the heat work. There are a few rules you learn in this life, and one of them is, when the rain has made the world into a secret, drink something hot and pretend it tells you the truth. The parts counterman had the kind of hands Jack respected, knuckles scarred, half-moons of grit that no sink gets all the way out. He was arguing gently with a driver about the price of a sensor for a modern truck that talked to the government more than it talked to the road. Jack made a note of his rhythm. This was a man who could be helped by honesty and offended by hurry. Maya slid the plate in front of Jack. Hash the color of autumn and Sunday afternoons. Eggs that did not pretend to be anything else. Toast with butter that had melted into it like a good idea you finally acted on. You on a schedule? She asked, pouring another inch of coffee without being asked. Everybody is, Jack said, but mine's elastic. She lifted a brow. Elastic breaks if you stretch it enough. Then I'll pretend it's braided, he said, and her smile arrived before it hid again. He ate like men do who remember to be grateful. Not fast, not slow, head tipped a little toward the plate like a prayer that didn't say its own name. The coffee put the seams of the day back where they belonged. He felt the place fill behind him with the quiet talk of drivers who measure their lives in counties and rest areas, in weather systems, and the names women write on the paper cups at small-town coffee stands. The storm shouldered the windows, testing the seals, making the neon squirm. At the parts counter, the argument had turned to confederacy, two men thinking with one problem. The clerk was named Earl, if the grease-black script on his shirt could be trusted, and after the other driver's sensor situation had been settled with a shrug that meant, this is the world now. Earl looked over at Jack like he'd been aware of him from the minute the bell thunked. You look like a man who knows the difference between a fix and a story, Earl said. Jack smirked. Some days I do. Some days I tell the story until it behaves like a fix. What's it doing? Earl wiped his palms on a rag that had once been white and had made peace with its fate. Jack laid it out without flourish. The stumble under throttle, the smooth idle if you feathered it, the split wire on the lift pump he had dressed in a motel parking lot 2 winters back and asked to be a hero beyond its pay grade. He didn't say anything about the voice. He didn't say anything about the way the word don't had grown teeth inside the cabin. Machines liked facts. People needed a different brew. Show me, Earl said, and the two of them stepped into the rain that had paused in its anger, as if curious enough to let them be. Under the hood, the engine steamed a little, just enough to mark the line where heat met weather. Earl leaned in with the grace of a man who had made bargains with gravity and won more than he lost. He touched the tape, the connector, the old repair that had held because sometimes even a bad plan works if you respect it in the right tone of voice. You did this somewhere a man shouldn't have to work, Earl said. Not praise, not insult, a reading. Windy motel lot south of Tucumcari, Jack said. Thermos lid between my teeth and a flashlight with a mind of its own. Earl grunted, that compact male sound that includes admiration, regret, and a question. I'll get you a proper pigtail and a connector that isn't ashamed of itself. You want me to do it, or you want to do it, and me to watch while pretending I'm not? Split the labor, Jack said. You talk me out of dumb ideas. I'll pretend to listen. They worked with a quiet you only hear when 2 men are letting the job do the speaking. Earl cracked a new connector from a blister pack. Jack eased the old friend of a wire loose, stripping it clean with a tool that had been made for the purpose instead of a pocket knife that had learned too many languages. They crimped, heat shrank, and tucked it back like a bone in a healed arm. Try it, Earl said, stepping back toward the bumper. Rain ticked his cap brim and rolled off like someone else's trouble. Jack climbed into the cab, turned the key, and felt the engine take a breath like a swimmer finding the surface. The idle settled to a reliable heartbeat. He eased the throttle a hair. The stumble was less. Another breath. Less again. He held the rev just above idle, then dropped it. The note stayed honest. Earl circled a hand. Up again, down again. Jack complied. The engine answered without stutter. That's a fix, Earl said, voice raised over the rain that had remembered its grievance. Not a story. Jack nodded, half to the man, half to Rosie, half to the faith you put in an outcome you can't live very long without. He killed the engine, pocketed the keys with a small noise like gratitude. When he climbed back down, the rain decided it had been patient enough and came at them in a sheet that turned the lot into a bruise again. Inside, Maya hung a white towel on a hook near the door, like she'd divined there might be 2 wet men limping in with more grease under their nails than sense in their plans. You want a piece of pie for good behavior? She asked Earl. Want? Yes, Earl said. Ken? No. Why not? Jack asked, genuinely curious. Because if I eat lemon meringue after noon, the shop becomes a democracy, Earl said. And I don't run democracies. Maya sliced anyway and slid the plate in front of Jack. The meringue held together like a promise made by someone who means it. Jack took a bite and tasted June in roadside fruit stands and a woman in a kitchen humming to herself. He didn't think of Canyon. He tried not to think of the collar with a dog's name on the hook by the door. He tried not to think of the unfinished calls and the voice that had threaded itself into the cabin's bones. You a Texas boy? Maya asked, refilling his cup. Born and raised, he said. Raised again, more than once. Storm's sitting on the panhandle like it paid rent, she said. You headed east or west? East as a theory, he said. South if the weather gets personal. South is always personal, Maya said. And then the bell thunked as a woman came in with a coat soaked through and eyes that had been taught to look for exits. She stood just inside the door, scanning the room in a way that wasn't about hunger. The rain made a halo out of her hair. She held a leather satchel tight to her ribs. Not the way you hold something fragile, but the way you hold something you can't lose again. Maya went to her with a towel and the ordinary mercy of a person who understands that kindness moves like weather too. The woman thanked her, voice light but catching. When she looked up, her gaze crossed Jack's. A beat, another. The kind of moments that count themselves, even if you don't. He didn't know her. He knew the look. People look out from the edges of events in only so many ways. Her eyes were sharp and somewhere else, both at once, like a bird that's learned to study a horizon for hawks. She took a booth 2 down from his, sat on the edge like a runner not ready to surrender the muscles, and put the satchel on the vinyl as if the table had been built for it. Maya brought coffee. The woman cupped it, nodded thanks, didn't drink. Earl had wandered back to the parts desk, where a farmer in coveralls wanted to discuss the moral hazards of ethanol. Jack watched the woman not watching him. He told himself to mind his food and his road, to let strangers keep their storms. Then a thing happened that had nothing to do with decision. The whisper came again, clean as a tuning fork. Inside the glass and chrome of the diner, under the hum of a refrigeration case and the weather's handwork on the roof, it came. Don't lie. It wasn't his name this time. It wasn't a warning from a wire. It was a statement of terms. It landed in his chest like the memory of a promise made in a hospital hallway, while a vending machine blinked out of order and a nurse said, "Take your time." He looked at the woman. She had set her satchel just so, opened only enough to slip a hand in. Like you might when you're checking for a passport, a letter, a gun. The diner was suddenly too bright. The coffee tasted like its own answer. Jack felt the reflex rise, the one that gets you out of trouble by pretending the trouble is somebody else's. To look away. To forget what he'd heard. He didn't. He stood, left a 20 under the coffee cup because you pay the places that keep you human, and walked to the parts desk. "Earl," he said, "you got a minute where you don't mind pretending not to be at work?" "For a friend I met 40 minutes ago," Earl said. "I've had less reason." Jack tipped his head toward the woman without naming her. "That storm brought in more than rain," he said. "You know the kind of more I mean." Earl followed his glance, then let it go like a man who has learned not to stare into lightning. "You want me to call someone," he said. "Or you want me to not call anyone at all?" "Neither yet," Jack said. "I just want to make sure if I say one word to her, it's the right one." "Start with hello," Earl said. "It's the only honest word left some days." Jack turned back, found his palms suddenly damp, and laughed under his breath at himself. A man who could strip a wire in a roadside gale shouldn't be rattled by a stranger's eyes. But some rattles aren't about fear. They're about recognition, the kind that doesn't ask your permission first. He stepped to the booth, careful not to spook whatever animal caution she'd set loose inside herself. "Mom," he said, keeping his voice easy. "Forgive me. It's coming down out there like the sky took a grievance. If you need a ride when it lets up, I'm heading east, and my rig is big enough to keep you and that bag of yours dry." She looked at him straight and then through him, as if measuring the integrity of bolts that were not on display. Then her gaze softened, the way steel cools into usefulness. "You always open with that?" she asked. "No," he said. "I usually open with silence. Today seems to be a day for making exceptions." She considered that, then lifted the coffee to her mouth and drank the first drink like a person remembering what warmth is for. "I'm not going far," she said. "Just out of town. There's a motel on the state line with a red sign and too many stories." "I know it," Jack said. He knew them all. She tilted her head, listening to something Jack couldn't hear. "Do you ever feel it?" she asked, almost to herself. "When a day wants something from you?" "All the time," Jack said. "Today, too." "What does yours want?" "To not lie," he said, before he could stop himself, and watch the sentence land where it might do damage. She blinked once, slow, then nodded like a clerk tallying a column that had finally come out even. "Mine too," she said. She glanced toward the satchel. "And yes, I could use a ride east when the rain stops trying to bully the county." "I'll settle the bill," Jack said. "You finish that coffee. We'll time our run between tempers." When he turned away, the whisper had no reason to speak. He understood the terms. Some days, you get to decide. Other days, the road decides, and you sign your name with the pen it hands you. By the time the rain softened from rage to argument, the lot had turned into a mirror that reflected a bent and wavery world. Jack and the woman moved through it with the choreography of people who have agreed, without saying so, to trust only the ground directly under their feet. He reached the passenger side and swung the door. She stepped up with the easy athletic grace of someone who spent years making their body show up for them. The satchel thumped once against the step, a sound with weight in it. Jack heard himself counting, 1, 2, and didn't know why it felt like counting seconds between thunder and lightning. "What do I call you?" he asked, hand on the door. She looked at him a heartbeat longer than names usually need. "Call me Nora," she said, and the name fit the rain without pretending to be anything else. "I'm Jack," he said. "I know," she said. He could have asked how. He did not, because sometimes the question is also a lie. He rolled the name around in his head like a dime in a pocket. Nora. The storm shivered again as they buckled in. He turned the key. Rosie woke the way a dog lifts its head when a familiar footstep hits the porch. As he eased them toward the exit, Maya lifted 2 fingers in a small salute, good enough to be a prayer, and Earl nodded once like a man satisfied with a repair that had done more than correct a wire. They rolled back into the interstate where the world had been washed down to essentials. The wipers kept their beat. The tires whispered the long words only tires know. And in the little country between 2 people not yet telling the whole truth, the truck filled with an honest quiet that felt like the first right move in a game that might matter. Behind them, the truck stop returned to its bright, tired morning. Ahead, the sky lightened one shade the way a bruise does when it begins to admit it will heal. Jack set his eyes on the gray ribbon south and east. Beside him, Nora set her hand atop the satchel and breathed in, slow and careful, as if the next hour might want to remember the shape of her breath. The voice in the steel said nothing, which seemed to Jack like a kind of blessing. He took it for what it was and drove. The sky had rinsed itself clean by the time they hit the state line. Sunlight came through the thinning clouds like apology. Too late, too bright. The asphalt steamed. Puddles glimmered in the median like scraps of foil someone had thrown away and never bothered to pick up. Nora sat with her hands folded over the satchel, eyes on the window. She hadn't said a word since they'd pulled out of the truck stop, and Jack hadn't forced the silence to work harder than it wanted to. Some quiets you leave alone. They've got their own jobs to do. He drove steady, keeping the old Peterbilt in the right lane, keeping the RPMs where Rosie purred her best. The radio was off. The world outside was enough noise. Tires on wet road, the low percussion of wind through side mirrors, the soft exhale of each gear shift. He thought about the whisper, about the way the word "don't" had clung to the inside of the cab, even after he'd shut the engine down. He thought about how it had stopped the second Nora had spoken her name. Coincidence, sure. The highway was made of coincidences stacked high enough to look like fate. But the part of him that still believed machines had souls, the same part that left 3 pennies on every rest stop table, wouldn't let it go that easy. "Nice rig?" Nora said finally. Her voice was rough silk, low, careful, the kind of tone people use when they've been alone too long and don't trust their own sound yet. "Thanks," Jack said. "She's older than she looks. Had to rebuild her more times than I've rebuilt myself." "You ever finish?" He glanced over. She wasn't looking at him, but a reflection in the window caught his eyes anyway. Her expression was unreadable, except for the corners of her mouth where something like a smile had considered showing up and changed its mind. "Never," he said. "But I've gotten good at pretending I might." She gave a quiet chuckle, the kind that didn't ask to be noticed. "Honest answer." "That's all I've got left," Jack said. "Apparently honesty's my theme today." Nora turned her head then, really looked at him. "You said that back in the diner." "Don't lie." "You mean that?" Jack nodded once. "Seems the day's been reminding me of it." She studied him like she was weighing whether to believe the words or the man saying them. "Then maybe we're heading in the same direction after all." "East." "No," she said softly. "Truth." He waited for her to keep going. She didn't. The highway rolled on. They reached the motel before dusk, a squat L-shaped building with faded red letters that once promised clean rooms and now only managed rooms. A neon vacancy sign buzzed at the edge of the gravel lot, throwing light across the puddles like blood diluted with rain. Jack pulled in, killed the engine, and felt the silence rush up to meet him. He sat a moment, hands on the wheel, watching steam drift off the hood. Nora didn't move to get out. She looked straight ahead, lips pressed thin, like she was rehearsing the next hour in her head. "You sure this is your stop?" he asked. "Yeah," she said, though the word didn't sound like it belonged to her. "You don't have to wait." He didn't answer. He climbed out, circled around, and opened her door. The gesture felt old-fashioned, but sometimes kindness is the only language a moment understands. She hesitated, then stepped down, her boots splashing into a shallow puddle. "You running from something?" he asked quietly. "Everyone is," she said, tightening her grip on the satchel. "That bag got your reason inside?" She looked at him, really looked, and he saw it then. Fear layered under exhaustion, tied up with a thread of resolve. Something like that. A motel clerk watched them through the window, half hidden behind the glow of a TV. Jack gave him a nod that said nothing to see here, and the man turned his attention back to the screen. "I'll make sure the truck's fueled and ready," Jack said. "Storms come quick this time of year. If you need to head farther east, I'll be rolling at dawn." "Why would you help me?" Nora asked. "Because someone once did when I didn't deserve it," he said. "Seems wrong to let the math stay unbalanced." For a second, her eyes softened. Then she nodded. "Room 8, she said. "If I'm not there by morning, just keep going." She turned and walked toward the row of doors. The satchel knocked gently against her hip with each step. Jack watched her go. He didn't like how much space her absence left behind. The motel had the usual trimmings: a vending machine that hummed louder than it needed to, a soda stain fossilized into the carpet, a faint smell of cigarettes that no amount of cleaner could bleach out. Jack rented a room 2 doors down from hers. He didn't ask why he'd picked that one. He sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, the air conditioner wheezing in the corner like a tired animal. He pulled out his phone. No messages. There hadn't been any in months. He scrolled anyway, as if muscle memory might conjure a voice that wasn't coming back. Then, light. A flash through the blinds. Not lightning. Headlights. A black sedan easing into the lot, moving slow. Too clean, too quiet. The kind of car people rent when they don't want to be remembered. 2 men got out. Suits. The kind that look wrong outside of cities. One checked his watch, the other scanned the row of rooms. Jack felt it before he thought it. Trouble, capital T. The kind that doesn't announce itself until it's too close to dodge. He stood, crossed to the window, kept the blinds angled just enough. The men moved toward the office first, talking to the clerk. The clerk shrugged, pointed, east, then south, then maybe toward the row where Nora had gone. Jack's pulse ticked faster. He didn't owe her anything. He barely knew her name. But the whisper from earlier curled back through his head like smoke. Don't lie. He grabbed his jacket, stepped into the rain-damp night, and walked the gravel between the trucks. The neon flickered, painting his boots red every other second. Room 8's curtain was drawn. Light leaked under the door. He knocked once, soft. Nora's voice came quick and low. "Who is it?" "Jack." A pause. Then the lock clicked. She opened the door a fraction, enough to show one green eye and a sliver of tension. "You weren't supposed to check on me," she said. "Maybe not, but you've got company you didn't invite." Her face changed, first confusion, then understanding, then the kind of calm people use when panic would waste too much time. She stepped back. "How many?" "2. Maybe more if they're smart enough to park out of sight." She closed the door behind him and pulled the curtains tight. The satchel was open now, and inside wasn't money or clothes. It was a stack of paper folders, the kind printed with government letterheads and plastic evidence seals. Jack stared. "Tell me I'm not seeing what I think I'm seeing." "Depends what you think," Nora said. "And how good you are at keeping promises." "I didn't make any," he said. "You did," she replied, "when you said you wouldn't lie." Outside, a car door slammed. Voices, low, sharp, confident, boots on gravel. Nora looked at him. "You still feel like helping me?" Jack's hand went to the keys in his pocket, feeling their familiar weight. "Yeah," he said. "Looks like the road's not done with either of us yet." He opened the door, checked the lot. The 2 men were splitting, one toward the office, the other toward the far end of the rooms. "Back window?" he asked. She nodded. "Bathroom. It opens enough if you're not picky about comfort." "Good thing I've lived out of smaller spaces," Jack said. He pushed it open, rain misting through the crack. The air outside smelled of asphalt and risk. Nora handed him the satchel. "If they stop me, you keep this moving. There's more in there than you want to know." He met her gaze. "We both know that's not how it's going to go." She studied him for a heartbeat. Then she climbed through the window, boots scraping tile. Jack followed, landing in wet grass that soaked through his jeans. Behind them, the motel's neon flickered again, then went dark. They ran. They cut behind the cinder-block spine of the motel and dropped into a drainage ditch where rainwater hurried west like it had a bus to catch. Grass soaked their knees and thighs in a single forgiving second. Beyond the ditch, a chain-link fence wore a strip of torn blue tarp that flapped and snapped in the wind like a stubborn flag. Jack put a palm to the metal, tested for give, then hoisted himself up and over. He landed soft for a man his size. Nora passed the satchel to him first, then swung herself after it with a gymnast's economy. Boots finding the fence diamonds like old friends. They crouched in the wet shadow of a billboard that used to sell a cheerful soda and currently sold nothing at all. The neon from the motel blinked twice, then died like a stage light, leaving the lot washed in sodium gloom. Voices lifted behind them, low, professional, no panic in them. The cadence of men who had done this kind of work too many times to treat it like a movie. "Your truck?" Nora asked, breath even, eyes on the dark. "My truck," Jack said. "Far end of the row. I didn't park under the lights. Good habit." "Paranoia," he said. "Turns out they're cousins." They moved along the back of the lot, hugging the weedy margin where discarded fast food cups went to retire. Jack kept his head angled, not looking at Rosie directly until he was close enough to touch metal. He keyed the door open with the quiet muscle memory of a man who has slept more nights in a cab than in a house. Nora climbed in, slid across, set the satchel on her knees. Jack took the driver's seat and breathed once to the count of 3, the way you do before you lift something you cannot drop. He turned the key. The Peterbilt woke with a velvet growl that felt louder than it was. He waited for the oil to come up, for the needles to clear the little coughs a cold start coughs even when the engine is warm. The lot behind them remained calm in that unnatural way of calm where tension holds its breath. "Seatbelt," he said. "Already on." He eased Rosie into motion, keeping the speed low enough that the truck's massive presence looked like a parked thing slowly changing its mind. Headlights stayed off until the last angle, then came on with the sleepy look of something honest. He rolled them toward the exit like he'd paid rent on the place and meant to get his deposit back. They were 3 truck lengths from the road when the black sedan slid from nowhere and blocked the mouth of the lot at a diagonal. A move that said, "We don't care if we look obvious. We intend to be." One man stepped out, palm raised in that universal stop gesture that imagines all drivers will honor. The other came around the far side, hand in his jacket like he had a question only one answer would satisfy. Jack didn't stop. He didn't charge either. He turned the wheel left, aimed for the gutter between sedan and curb, and gave Rosie the kind of throttle that makes a big rig feel smaller. The sedan driver misread mass as manners and took 1/2 step back. It was enough. The Peterbilt's bumper kissed the sedan's rear quarter not as an apology, but as an assertion, and the small car skated sideways on wet gravel with the offended squeal of money making a lifestyle change. The man with the hand in jacket reached for his sense of authority and found he'd left it in drier weather. Jack was past him before the man's surprise could turn into a plan. A horn whooped behind them, long and low, as another rig announced its opinion of the sudden geometry. "East?" Nora asked, steady as if this were a weather report. "East," Jack said. And they were on the on-ramp, the interstate rising ahead like a slate river. The storm had half spent itself, but the world still wore water. The wipers settled into their swing. The tires found their song. In the mirror, the sedan wrestled free, shook itself like a dog, and came after them with lights now, high beams ablaze across the wet. Company, Nora said. Would have been disappointed otherwise, Jack said, moving Rosie through her gears with that easy handshake feel, letting torque do the gentleman's work. The sedan closed some distance. Physics gives nimble cars a head start. But high speed on wet interstate is a bet you place with your life. Jack held to the right lane, then slid between a pair of cattle trucks rumbling nose to tail like brothers who didn't need to discuss anything. The smell of livestock rose like a memory of Earth. The sedan hung back, then tried the left. Jack let a half-inch off the throttle to draw the pocket between the trailers just a little tighter. A door that hinted it might shut if a stranger tried to walk through. Headlights swayed in the mirror, then fell small. The sedan had a boss who liked results more than funerals. "You've done this before," Nora said. Not a question. "I've done not dying before," Jack said. "It overlaps." He kept them east until the next exit, then took it without signaling and looped under the bridge to fold back onto the frontage road. Farm equipment sat in a gravel lot like extinct animals. A shuttered fireworks stand hunched behind a chain. He killed the headlights for 3 breaths, counted the beat of his heart, then brought them back at a lower clock. The sedan crested the overpass a half-minute later and sprinted past, map in its mind too simple to consider old cow paths and men who used them. Jack took a side road that bled south into cotton country, flat and open and faithful. The sky had the pale look of late afternoon after a hard argument with noon. Distant thunder rolled like furniture dragged in another apartment. He drove until the adrenaline bled into a usable calm, until the highway shrank behind them to a thought someone else was having. Only then did he glance at the satchel. "First real question," he said. "Do I need to know what's in there to keep you alive? Or am I a better help if I don't?" Nora traced a finger along the seam of the leather. "You'll be better help if you know enough to understand why there's no safe version of this trip." "Then give me the short gospel," he said. "We can save the sermon for when we're hiding at a truck wash." She undid the buckles and folded the mouth open. Inside were file folders with blocky labels, a small black drive taped into a hard plastic case, and a handful of photographs. Not the family kind. The kind built for evidence. Angles, dates written by hand, a scale card slipped into the corner of the frame like a cold habit. She held up a folder so he could read the tab. Aegis Aero Components, Turbine Fasteners, Internal Audit. Jack kept his eyes on the road, but the words crawled onto him anyway. "Aegis," he said, "out of Tulsa." "Oklahoma City headquarters now," she said. "Bigger lobby, same steel in the bones." He didn't say how he knew the name. He didn't have to. If you drive long enough, you haul for everybody. Boxed dreams, anonymous failure, pallets full of parts meant to become something that flies. "What did they do?" he asked, though some part of him already knew. "Not what they said," she answered. "The titanium bolts going into turbine assemblies? The spec calls for a grade that holds when heat gets biblical. Aegis sourced an alloy from a cut-rate supplier overseas, then they shaved the test results to make it look legitimate. The difference doesn't show if you only look once and want to be persuaded. Under sustained heat and vibration, it shows." She paused, fingers pressed white into the folder's edges. It showed in the worst way. Jack kept his hand steady on the wheel. "A test bed?" "A training flight," she said. "National Guard. Routine sortie out of the Panhandle. The birds came back with stories, except one didn't." The road blurred for a second, not in his eyes, but in his chest. He'd heard about that one on a deep night when the radio whispered and the world was empty enough that bad news traveled farther. He remembered the way the anchor had said the pilot's name, like saying it was an apology. He hadn't turned the volume up, He hadn't turned it down either. He had let the words exist in the cab, and they had stayed. "You work there," he said. "Worked," she said. "Compliance, audits, safety chains, the paperwork that tells the truth if you read it right. I flagged an anomaly, and my boss told me to look at it again until it wasn't one. That happens, and sometimes it's even honest." I looked. The numbers didn't change. Only the tone of the meetings did. And those two back there? Not law, not yet. Company men. Or the contractors company men hire when they want law without paperwork. Jack nodded. The rain had gentled to a spit, the way a sky forgives without admitting it was wrong. The cotton fields went gray-blue under the smoothing light. "You took the files," he said. "I took copies," she said. "The originals will sleep in their drawers until someone gives them permission to feel ashamed. What I dug out are the test curves, procurement approvals with signatures that don't belong on that grade of metal, invoices run through a shell distributor in Louisiana, and internal emails that never thought they'd need to walk outdoors." She tapped the drive case. "The digital trail, too. If you line it all up, it says what no one inside will say out loud. That bolts designed for hell were swapped for bolts designed for Tuesday," Jack said. "And that somebody put the savings on a spreadsheet where they call it efficiency," she said. "A fraction of a percentage that became a widow. 2 widows." Jack did not ask for names. He didn't want to know them until he could put them somewhere safe inside himself. He let the truck hum. He let the road explain itself in the way only roads know. "What's your plan?" he asked after a count of 6 breaths. "Get this to someone who can make it mean something," she said. "I have a contact in Dallas, an attorney with a spine I've seen bend and not break. She knows a prosecutor who isn't for sale. But I don't trust my own car anymore, and every phone I owned died the same day I asked the wrong questions." "You came to the motel because I had to get out of town when my supervisor suddenly cared enough to offer me a ride home," she said, a small twist of humor at the edge of fear. The truck stop felt like a place the world still runs on favors. I was right. He took that and turned it over. "Dallas," he said. "That's south and east. Storm says the same." "You can let me out at a station on the north side," she said. "I'm not your cargo, and you don't owe me more trouble than you've already bought." Jack thought about the whisper, the way it had braided itself into the truck's bones earlier like a melody you can't unhear once you hear it right. He thought about the word "don't," how it had stopped feeling like a scold and started feeling like a compass. "OA isn't the word I'd use," he said. "The road puts its thumb on the scale sometimes. Today it's pressing down." She watched him the way people watch a storm line, trying to read which field will get rain. "You sure?" she said. "Helping me won't make your life simpler." "Simple and right aren't cousins," he said. "We'll head south at the next county road, pick up the state highway that skims the river, then slide into the back of Dallas when the night forgets to count us." "You've done this before," she said again. Softer now. Less impressed than resigned to the idea that survival is a craft. "Not exactly this," he said. "Different freight, same physics." They ran south a while, the land flattening into a kind of grace. A pair of pronghorns stood at the fence line and watched them go as if they were a story being told in the wrong language. The storm finally let go. The clouds bled into a bruised lavender, then a patient gray. The air smelled like wet dirt and something older than schedules. When they hit the 2-lane that pointed toward the river, Jack eased Rosie into her long-legged stride. The engine settled like a horse you've convinced to trust you. In the mirror, The world they'd left did not project pursuit. Men like the ones in the sedan didn't quit for rain or dinner, but they also didn't love mud. He guessed they'd circle ahead, try to box her into the obvious. He intended to be the opposite. Nora slid one of the photographs from a sleeve and set it on the dash where the rubber lip held it against the vibration. The image showed a bolt head, hairline cracked, magnified under lab light. A gloved finger pointed to a place the naked eye could ignore. A gel pen had written the date in the border, late spring, and the initials of a tech who probably thought their careful work would end at a memo. "Why show me this?" Jack asked. "Because I need to say it out loud," she said. "That line right there is the difference between the sound a turbine makes when it sings and the sound it makes when it eats itself. I need to hear someone else say it too." He looked down long enough to make a promise. "All right," he said. "That line right there is the difference." She breathed out like she'd been holding her air since the motel. "Thank you." The road offered a convenience store where a red ice chest sat under a hand-painted sign. A soda machine whirred like a patient insect. Jack pulled in, took the pump farthest from the lone working light, and began feeding diesel to a hungry heart. Nora stayed in the cab, head bent over the satchel like a lector at a church that only read ugly gospels. When he climbed back in, she had a different folder open. The tab: Procurement, Vendor Vetting, Gray Line Industrial Metals. Louisiana, he guessed. Baton Rouge box address, she said. No warehouse square footage, no inspections logged. Wire transfers routed through a bank in Delaware that sells shell companies like it sells coffee. The fun part is, the emails that approved it read like they were written by someone who used to be an engineer and learned to be a lawyer late in life. "How many people does it take to lie correctly?" he said. "Fewer than it takes to tell the truth the first time," she said. They rolled on. The sky went from tired to genuinely dark. The kind of dark that asks for headlights and gets haunted ones in return. The interstate far to the north glowed faint on the horizon, a river of white fire and red embers. Down here the world pared itself down to fence posts, the occasional farmhouse light, and the long, unwavering fact of the lane. Sometime after full dark settled, Nora dozed with her head back and her hand still on the satchel. Like a parent falling asleep with a child on their chest, Jack let the truck sing to her, ing. The miles stacked with the steady click of a dealer laying down cards. A coyote crossed ahead, looked at them with the ancient skepticism of his kind, and vanished into the mesquite like a rumor. He thought of Dallas, a city that looked like ambition had learned math, and of the courthouse steps where the word evidence becomes more than paper. He thought of the two men in the sedan and the people who paid them, the ones who never get their shoes wet and always have indoor voices. He pictured Earl at the parts counter, Maya with coffee like medicine, and felt the web of small decencies that hold the big world up enough to walk under. The whisper did not come again, and he did not need it to. The cab belonged to the honest quiet they'd earned. Near midnight. Midnight spelled with letters, not numbers, because the clock in his dash had given up on red digits years ago. He saw the low firefly chain of a town ahead. The kind of place that keeps a sheriff, 3 churches, and a diner that closes when the pie runs out. He eased Rosie onto the shoulder just shy of the first streetlight circle and nudged Nora's arm. "Hey," he said, "we're cutting south again. There's a bridge past here that lifts us over the river and toward the old East Highway. You want to stretch or keep sleeping with your eyes open?" She blinked awake with the feral alertness of someone who learned to be ready. "I'm good," she said, voice huskier than earlier, human wear making it warmer. She tucked the folders, checked the drive with her thumb like a rosary bead, and looked out at the town. "What's this place?" "Name's on a water tower," he said. "Every town's got secrets. This one's about to hold ours for an hour." "An hour might be all it needs," she said. And he couldn't tell if that was hope or fear. They crossed the bridge. The river below moved like muscular glass. Lightning stitched the far horizon without bothering to thunder. The two-lane curled through a belt of pecan farms and then into a patchwork of pasture and tract homes tossed up before some recession and left to make meaning out of cheap stucco. At the edge of the tract sat a small sheriff's substation with a single cruiser parked at an angle meant to say, "Nobody's here, but we're thinking of you." Jack slowed, eyes on the cruiser, then on the dark beyond. "What?" Nora asked. "Thinking," he said. "About going in?" "About who you trust," he said, "and whether this county answers to the same phone numbers your former boss does." She weighed that in a silence that had gotten comfortable with itself. "Keep going," she said. "My attorney has a friend in the U.S. Attorney's office. If we can get close enough to Dallas to breathe the same air, the chain gets stronger." "Then we keep going," he said. And the decision felt good in his bones, like settling a shoulder under a stubborn weight. They slid back into the night. The road offered them to itself, and they accepted. Jack set the cruise at a speed that felt more like belonging than running. He felt the trust grow between his hands and the wheel. Man and machine, yes, but also man and day, man and choice. Nora watched the window glass and saw only what she needed to. An hour later, an honest hour, the kind you can feel in your back, he angled them into a truck wash on the edge of a larger town where the highway grew opinionated again. Blue fluorescent lights flickered over wet concrete. A teenager in a plastic apron smoked a cigarette with an intensity that made smoke look like theology. Jack paid cash for a rinse that hid new mud under old water. When they pulled back onto the frontage road, the Peterbilt had turned gray with the night again. Just another pilgrim moving through. They were within a long morning of Dallas now, which meant within reach of both answers and the kind of trouble that grows suits. Jack let the thought live with him without setting a chair at the table for it. He had a cargo now that weighed nothing and everything, and a woman beside him whose name he'd only heard once and believed all the way down. "Tomorrow," Nora said, soft like a pact. "I put these papers on a desk that knows what to do with them." "Tomorrow," Jack said, "we teach a city a new word. Enough." He guided Rosie south and east, the stars above doing their job without commentary, the earth below giving back exactly what they asked of it and no more. Between the two, a truck carried a satchel, and a man and a woman carried a promise neither of them had spoken all the way out loud yet. They didn't have to. The road always hears. Dawn found them halfway between nowhere and the edges of Dallas County, the horizon painted in strokes of apricot and violet. The Peterbilt's chrome caught the sunrise and threw it back in fractured light. For a few miles, the truck looked like it was burning, alive in the most literal sense. Jack hadn't slept. Nora had drifted in and out, the kind of shallow rest that leaves your mind pacing even when your body gives up. She woke just as the first light touched the cab, one hand still curled protectively over the satchel. "Morning," she asked, voice husky, half asleep. "Technically," Jack said. "We outran the night, but it's catching up." She rubbed her eyes, looked at the world sliding by. Fields turned into warehouses, warehouses into suburbs. The air changed too, thicker, noisier, carrying the smell of oil, dust, and fresh asphalt. "You've been driving straight through," she said. "I've gone longer," he said. "Sometimes the wheels need to turn or the ghosts start talking louder." "What ghosts?" Jack smiled without humor. All of them. The ones you pick up at rest stops. The ones that ride shotgun when you're quiet too long. They don't like when the truck stops moving. Nora studied him for a moment. You lost someone, she said softly. He didn't look at her. More than one. He kept his eyes forward, but the memory crept in anyway. Uninvited, insistent. A stretch of black ice near Laramie, a smaller truck ahead of him, a flash of brake lights, and the phone call after. When a voice that had been the center of his life turned into a sound the world could no longer make. He tightened his grip on the wheel, not to hold it steady, but to hold himself. You? He asked, changing the air between them. Nora looked down at her hands. Not someone, something. I believe the system could fix itself if you just told the truth loud enough. Turns out the truth whispers and money screams. Still whispering anyway, he said. Yeah. Her smile was thin. Guess I'm stubborn that way. They drove on. The radio stayed off. But the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was alive with unspoken things. By late morning, Dallas appeared on the horizon, a skyline drawn in silver and shadow. It rose out of the flatland like an idea trying to prove itself. The interstate widened, lanes multiplying like choices. Traffic thickened, horns talking in the only language cities understand. Jack hated city driving. Too much noise, too many mirrors, not enough space for thinking. The Peterbilt wasn't built for quick moves. It was a creature of rhythm and distance, not chaos. You sure your contact's still in town? He asked. Nora checked her phone. A burner, cheap plastic, prepaid, one she'd bought from a gas station the night before. She texted last night, told me to meet her at a cafe in Deep Ellum, noon. He looked at the clock that didn't work and smiled. Noonish then. East side, Nora added. You'll hate the streets. I already do. They left the interstate, trading speed for confusion. Murals flashed by, faces of bluesmen, saints, slogans painted by people who needed color to keep breathing. The truck felt too large for the narrow roads, but Jack threaded her through the city like a surgeon with a steady hand. They found the cafe tucked between a thrift store and a tattoo parlor. The sign read, Mercy Street Coffee, the kind of name that pretends to be ironic, but isn't. Jack parked 2 blocks down in a delivery zone and left the engine idling. You want me inside? No, Nora said. It'll draw less heat if I go alone. Heat's already here, he said, but I'll trust your read. She nodded, tucking the satchel under her arm. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, I'll give you 30, he said. Then I come looking. A small smile flickered across her face. You're bad at taking orders. I only take them from the truck, he said. She stepped out, closed the door gently. The moment she disappeared around the corner, Jack felt the cab grow colder. He lit a cigarette he didn't need and watched the reflections in the windshield instead of the street. Minutes passed. He counted them by habit, the way truckers do when they're trying not to worry. At 17 minutes, a silver SUV rolled slow past his mirror. Tinted windows, no plates on the front. Corporate clean. Jack felt it in his gut before he saw the face. One of the men from the motel, behind the wheel, talking into a phone. The SUV turned the corner toward the cafe. Jack's cigarette hit the floor. He threw Rosie into gear. The truck's engine growled down the block, scattering a flock of pigeons that didn't care about human drama. He swung around the corner and saw the SUV parked crooked outside Mercy Street, one door open. Nora wasn't in sight. Jack didn't think. Thinking was too slow. He hit the air horn once, a sound that shook glass in nearby windows. People turned. The man in the suit flinched, reaching for something under his jacket. Jack braked hard, yanked open the door, and jumped down before the truck had fully stopped. He hit the sidewalk in 3 strides, eyes on the cafe. Inside, through the glass, Nora stood near the counter, frozen between 2 men. One was her contact. Short hair, sharp suit, fear barely hidden. The other, a stranger in black, held a hand under his coat. Jack didn't carry a gun anymore. He'd promised himself that after Wyoming. But he had a wrench, a solid length of steel he kept under the seat. He was holding it now, heavy in his palm. He shoved the door open. Bells rang. Coffee cups froze in midair. "Hey," he said, voice low and dangerous. "I think the lady ordered to go." The man in black turned, surprise flashing into recognition. "You again?" he said. "Me again," Jack said, and swung the wrench. It connected with the man's forearm, not bone-breaking, just enough to make him drop what he was reaching for. A gun clattered to the floor. Nora moved instantly, kicking it away, then grabbing the satchel. "Time to leave," she said. Jack nodded, grabbed her arm, and pulled her toward the door. Behind them, shouts. One of the men lunged. Jack turned, elbowed him in the chest hard enough to send him into a display of pastries. Outside, the SUV driver scrambled for his weapon. Jack didn't slow down. He pushed Nora toward the truck. "In!" They climbed in as a bullet tore through the air and buried itself in the truck's door. Metal screamed, but held. Jack slammed the clutch, threw Rosie into gear, and the Peterbilt roared forward. The SUV gave chase, tires spitting rain and gravel. "Who the hell were they?" Jack asked over the noise. "Not a security detail?" Nora said. "My contact was supposed to be alone." "Was?" "Yeah," she said. "Guess Aegis found her first." The city swallowed them in sound. Sirens, horns, echoes off concrete. Jack took side streets, cutting through industrial blocks and forgotten alleys. The SUV followed for a while, then vanished in traffic. They didn't stop until they hit the highway again, heading south out of the sprawl. Jack's hands were steady, but his pulse was not. "You hurt?" he asked. "No." "You?" He looked down at the fresh bullet dent in the door, the paint chipped and smoking. "Rosie's mad. I'll live." Nora exhaled, leaning back. "They know I'm coming now. No more hiding." "Then we go louder," Jack said. "You wanted the truth to scream? Let's give it a megaphone." She turned to him, eyes sharp again. "You think you can get us to someone real?" "I know people," he said. "Old favors, old debts. Some of them still answer the phone." "You sure you want to do this?" "No," he said. "But I'm doing it anyway." The city shrank behind them, swallowed by its own noise. The open highway stretched ahead, sun climbing, asphalt shimmering. For the first time since this began, Jack smiled. Not the tired kind, but the kind that shows teeth. "Next stop," he said. "Truth." Nora smiled back, small but fierce. "Then let's drive like we mean it." The Peterbilt thundered south, carrying its living cargo and a secret that no longer wanted to stay quiet. The road south unrolled like a confession, long and low, lined with billboards that promised barbecue, salvation, or new tires, depending on what kind of sinner you were. By the time they cleared the last shadows of Dallas, the day had grown sharp and cloudless. Heat shimmered up from the asphalt, blurring the edges of everything. Jack drove with his arm out the window, the wind tugging at his sleeve, the horizon pulling at something deeper. Nora sat beside him, legs tucked under, hair tied up in a loose knot that had given up fighting gravity. The satchel was at her feet, zipped but never far from reach. Neither spoke for miles. It wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was the silence of people who'd seen too much of each other's truth to fill the air with noise. Finally, Nora said, "You could have left back there. Nobody would have blamed you." Jack shrugged. Nobody would have known either. But I would. You always keep your promises. When they're worth the trouble. She smiled faintly. And this one? He glanced over. Haven't decided yet. She laughed, soft and quick. The sound of something human in a world that had forgotten how. Where they stopped in a small town north of Houston, a place called Livingston. It had a courthouse that looked like it hadn't lost a case since the 50s, and a diner that smelled like bacon and second chances. Jack parked Rosie under a live oak whose branches reached over the road like an old man's hands. Inside, the diner was cool and dim, the kind of place where ceiling fans turned slow and everyone pretended not to listen. The waitress brought coffee without asking. The sign on her chest read, "Brenda," and she had the easy warmth of someone who'd seen every kind of tired. "You folks just passing through?" she asked. "Always," Jack said. Brenda poured them both refills and nodded toward the window, where the Peterbilt gleamed in the sun. "That's a fine machine. My brother used to drive. Said the road was the only place that made sense anymore." Jack smiled. He wasn't wrong. When she left, Nora leaned forward. "So, how do we do this? My contact's gone. The company knows I'm alive. And we're sitting on evidence that could bury a defense contractor and anyone who took their checks." Jack tore a piece of napkin and rolled it between his fingers. "You said you had a backup contact. Someone federal." "Yeah," she said. "Assistant U.S. Attorney. Goes by Serena Miles. She's in Houston, if she's still breathing free air." "And she knows what's in those files?" "She knows enough to start caring." Jack nodded slowly. "Then we find her. But we go smart. They'll be watching the city. Every phone tower, every camera. Aegis doesn't play defense when it's scared. They go for offense." "You've dealt with people like this before," she said. "I've hauled for them," he said quietly. "Years ago. When I was younger and thought neutrality was the same thing as decency." "What changed?" He looked out the window. A call in the middle of the night. A plane that didn't land. A promise I couldn't keep. Nora didn't ask more. Some grief doesn't want to be explained. It just wants to be carried by someone who won't drop it. They rolled into Houston under a sky the color of tin. The freeways stacked like ribs, feeding into the glass towers that glittered over the bayou. Jack felt the weight of 100,000 stories moving around them. People trying to live, to forget, to be invisible. He found a truck stop off I-45, tucked behind a row of warehouses. "This is home base until we get eyes on your contact," he said. Nora opened her laptop, an old dented thing that had seen better wars. She plugged in a portable drive, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Screens of code, documents, metadata. "Encrypted?" Jack asked. "Twice," she said. "But Aegis has better tech than God. If they want in, they'll find a way." Then we move faster. She nodded. "Serena was last in the federal building downtown. I can't just walk in. I'm probably on every watch list they own. But if I can get a signal out, maybe she'll come to us." Jack leaned back, watching her face in the glow of the screen. Determination, exhaustion, fear, they all lived there. But beneath it, something else had started to grow. Resolve. "Give me an hour," she said. "I'll find her." He stood, stretching. "I'll check the lot. Make sure we're alone." Outside, the heat hit like a wall. Diesel fumes hung heavy in the air. A couple of drivers sat on milk crates, smoking and swapping lies. He nodded to them, walked the perimeter. The world looked calm, but calm was a liar. A sedan idled across the street, windows tinted. Same style, same clean lines as the one from Dallas. His stomach tightened. He walked back to the cab, quiet, careful. Nora was typing fast now, eyes glued to the screen. "You find her?" "Trying. I spoofed an IP through a clinic network. Give me 5 minutes." "Make it 2, he said, sliding into the seat. Nora glanced up. "Why?" "Because our friends from Dallas just RSVP'd." She froze. "How many?" "Too many for comfort." Outside, the sedan's doors opened. 2 men stepped out, one talking into a radio, the other scanning the lot. Jack turned the key. Rosie came alive. Her engines growl loud enough to make the windows shake. "Hold on," he said. Nora grabbed the dash. "Jack!" He dropped the clutch. The Peterbilt lurched forward, tires screaming, diesel roaring. The sedan swerved, men diving clear. They hit the exit lane and merged onto the feeder road before anyone could aim properly. Horns blared, tires burned. The smell of oil and adrenaline filled the cab. "Jack!" Nora shouted. "We can't keep running like this." "Then we stop running," he said. "We go straight to her." "To Serena?" "Yeah, we walk right into the storm." "That's suicide." "Maybe," Jack said, "but it's also the only place they won't expect us." He slammed the shifter, and Rosie surged forward like a warhorse that finally got permission to charge. Behind them, the sedan gave chase again, its headlights small and furious in the mirror. Nora clutched the satchel to her chest. "If we die—" "We're not dying today," Jack said. "Not before we make them listen." Downtown Houston rose ahead, steel and glass glittering like the edge of a blade. Sirens wailed somewhere distant, as if the city itself was warning them away. Jack tightened his grip on the wheel. "You said Serena works in the Federal Building, right?" "Yes." "Corner of Louisiana and Rusk." "Then hang on." Rosie barreled through the traffic, horns and curses chasing her wake. Jack could feel the engine straining, the heat climbing, the city closing in. The skyscrapers loomed taller, the lanes narrower. And then, blue lights. A patrol car turned the corner ahead, sirens screaming. Then another. Jack's eyes flicked to Nora. "We're out of road." "Not yet," she said. "Head for the building. If we can make it inside, they can't touch us." He looked at the satchel, the city, the shrinking distance between them. "You better be right," he said. "I'm not," she said. "But it's all we've got." The Federal Building gleamed ahead, sunlight flashing off its mirrored windows. Jack aimed for the loading zone, slammed the brakes, and felt the truck shudder to a stop. They jumped out together. The world exploded with sound, sirens, shouts, tires screeching. Nora ran for the doors, clutching the satchel like it was oxygen. Jack followed, just behind her, his boots hitting the concrete in rhythm with his heartbeat. A guard inside shouted. Guns came up. Jack raised his hands. "She's got evidence," he yelled. "Let her through." Nora reached the steps, just as the black sedan screeched into the plaza. One man jumped out, weapon drawn. Jack saw him aim. He didn't think. He just moved. The shot cracked the air. Then silence. The shot tore through the air like something alive. For a moment, the world held its breath. Jack felt the impact before he registered the sound, a hot punch just below his shoulder that spun him sideways. The pavement came up fast and hard. His breath left him in one ragged exhale. The noise of the plaza roared back in. Shouts, boots, sirens. Somewhere behind the pane, the engine of the black sedan idled with a predator's patience. "Jack!" Nora's voice cut through the chaos. He blinked up to see her turn, hair wild, the satchel still clutched tight. Her eyes locked on him. "Go," he rasped. But she didn't go. She dropped beside him, one hand pressing over the wound, the other gripping the leather bag like it was part of her. "You're hit," she said, voice shaking but steady at the same time. An impossible contradiction that only adrenaline can make. He grinned despite himself. Always wanted a souvenir from Houston. "Don't joke," she said. He looked past her, toward the shooter. The man from the sedan stood half-covered behind the car door, lining up another shot. Jack grabbed Nora's wrist. "Run, damn it." She hesitated a heartbeat too long, then moved. The federal building's glass doors loomed ahead, guarded now by a pair of officers whose instincts had finally caught up to the situation. "Federal agents," Nora shouted. "Whistleblower, classified materials, let me through." It wasn't the perfect sentence, but it had the right kind of panic. One of the guards lowered his weapon, gesturing her inside. Jack watched her cross the threshold, clutching the satchel. Only then did he let the pain flood in. Another bullet shattered concrete inches from his leg. He rolled behind one of the planters, his shoulder burning like the sun had crawled inside. The black sedan revved. Tires screamed. It started to lurch forward. But a blue and white patrol car slammed in from the cross street, pinning the sedan against a concrete barrier. For a second, everything froze. The kind of stillness you only get when two kinds of law collide. The official one, and the one written in fear. Jack used it. He pushed himself upright, half-crawled to the steps, and nearly collapsed again. Someone caught him under the arm, an older security officer with eyes that had seen too many versions of this day. "You with her?" the man asked. Jack nodded, tasting iron. "Then you'd better stay conscious. They're going to need your statement." Or inside, the building was a blur of uniforms, metal detectors, and shouted orders. The air smelled like antiseptic and urgency. Nora was cornered by 3 agents near the reception desk. Her hands were raised, palms out, the satchel lying open at her feet, papers spilling like the guts of a secret. "I have evidence," she said, voice breaking but clear. Flight records, procurement signatures, corrupted test data, all of it, Aegis Aero components. People died because of it. The agents looked at each other. One knelt, lifted a folder, scanned the header. His face changed. The faint shock of a man realizing the story in front of him is too big for the page. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you're going to come with us." "I'm not under arrest?" "Not yet. But you're definitely not safe out there." Jack stumbled through the doorway behind the guard, blood soaking his sleeve. Nora turned just in time to catch him before he hit the floor. "Jesus, Jack." "Guess I'm not as fast as I thought," he muttered. She pressed her hand to his shoulder again. "You're going to be fine." He wanted to believe her, but the edges of the world were going soft and gray. "You did it," he said, fighting to stay upright. "You got it inside." Her eyes glistened. "We did it." They didn't let her see him for a while after that. Paramedics took him to a small medical unit 2 floors up. The wound was messy but clean through, no artery hit, no shrapnel. He'd been lucky, or stubborn. When he came to again, the room was dim, humming with the sound of old ventilation. His shoulder ached like a question mark. Through the glass panel in the door, he saw movement, an agent talking with someone in a suit. Then Nora appeared. She looked smaller in the sterile light, but calmer too, like someone who'd finally exhaled after holding her breath for years. "They're debriefing me," she said. "Serena's alive. She was in a different office when they came for her. She saw the files." Jack smiled. "And?" "They're real," she said. "Every one of them. She's bringing in federal investigators, outside jurisdiction. It's going to hit the news by morning." He let his head fall back against the pillow. About time the truth learned how to shout. Nora came closer, eyes softening. "You saved my life." "You saved mine first," he said. "That's not how I remember it." "Well," Jack said, "that's how I'm writing it down." For the first time since Amarillo, they both laughed. Quietly, cautiously, like people afraid to break something fragile. 2 days later, the story hit every major network. Federal whistleblower exposes defense contractor fraud. Words like corruption, fatal oversight, and criminal negligence lit up the news crawls. Faces blurred out, names withheld, but the world had heard enough to know who to blame. Aegis stock collapsed by sundown. Executives resigned before anyone asked them to. The Senate promised hearings. The dead finally had their echo. Jack was cleared to leave the next morning. The hospital signed him out with the same indifference it used for everyone. He stepped into the sunlight, blinking like a man seeing the world for the first time in a different shape. Nora was waiting by Rosie, now parked under a magnolia tree across the street. The Peterbilt looked tired but proud. Fresh patch on the bullet hole, a smear of new paint that didn't quite match. She smiled when she saw him. "You're supposed to be resting." "I'm better when I'm moving." She studied him, then said, "They want me to testify in D.C. next month. Protection detail, safe housing, the whole package. You gonna take it?" "I think I have to," she said. "For the pilots, for the truth." Jack nodded. "Good." She hesitated. "And you?" He looked at the horizon. The road's still out there. Somebody's got to listen to what it's saying. She reached out, squeezed his good hand. "Then keep listening, Jack Mercer. The world needs more people who don't lie." He grinned. "I'll work on it." She turned to leave, then stopped. "When this is over," she said, "find me." He tipped his cap. "Count on it." She smiled once more and walked away, sunlight catching the edge of her hair until she vanished into the crowd. Jack climbed into the Peterbilt. The engine started on the first try, the familiar rumble filling the cab. He rested his hand on the dash. "Rosie," he said softly, "let's see what comes next." The truck rolled forward, slow and steady, back toward the open road. Somewhere beyond the city, a crosswind hummed through the side mirrors, a sound almost like a whisper. This time, it didn't say, "Don't lie." It said, "Keep going." And he did. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support inspires new stories to come